The envelope trembled in my hand as the nurse whispered, "DNA results." Time slowed. My sister's newborn twins slept peacefully in the nursery window before me, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect harmony. I knew before opening it. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slid my finger beneath the seal. 3 years of fertility treatments. 3 years of injections, hormones, disappointment. 3 years of David holding my hand, promising next time. The hospital's antiseptic smell suddenly suffocated me as I unfolded the paper. Black text on white. Clinical. Definitive. The twins, my sister's miracle babies after her own infertility diagnosis, carried my husband's DNA. And mine. I looked up through the nursery glass. One had my eyes. The other, David's dimpled chin. My architect mind, trained to see structural weaknesses, instantly calculated the magnitude of this betrayal. My sister. My husband. My embryos. I carefully refold the paper, sliding it into my designer bag. No tears. No screams. They expected hysteria from me. They expected weakness. They had no idea what was coming. I stared at the Chicago skyline from my 23rd floor office, watching a storm roll in over Lake Michigan. Dark clouds mirrored the turmoil inside me. 3 years of fertility treatments had left me hollow, yet somehow I was expected to congratulate my sister on her miraculous pregnancy. My phone buzzed on the glass desk, the architectural plans for the new waterfront development forgotten. David's name flashed on the screen. "Hey," I answered, my voice carefully controlled. Ever since Sophia's pregnancy announcement last week, something had felt off with him. "Are you coming home for dinner?" "I've got an emergency surgery," he said quickly. Too quickly. "Don't wait up." 3rd time this week. I traced the edge of the DNA results still in my bag. I hadn't told him yet. "Catherine? You still there?" His voice had that forced concern he perfected over the years. "Yes," I replied, watching lightning split the sky. "Good luck with surgery." I ended the call and turned back to the Chicago skyline, a city I'd helped shape. Buildings I'd designed stood against the darkening sky, each one meticulously planned, structured, perfect. Unlike my life, which was crumbling beneath a foundation of lies. My assistant Jennifer poked her head in. More than my assistant, my closest friend and, conveniently, one of Chicago's top divorce attorneys. "You need to eat something," she said, setting down a salad container. "And you need to tell me what's going on. You've been staring at those blueprints for hours without touching them." I hesitated, then pulled out the envelope. "Sophia's twins. They're mine." Jennifer's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" "My embryos. The ones that supposedly it didn't work during the IVF." I slid the paper across the desk. "Look at the DNA markers. They match both David and me." Jennifer scanned the document, her legal mind quickly processing the implications. "Holy shit, Catherine. That's one way of putting it. How did you even get this test done?" I turned back to the window. After Sophia called with her miracle pregnancy news, I went to Dr. Parker at Chicago Fertility. He's been treating both of us. At first he refused to discuss Sophia's case, but when I mentioned potential legal action, he caved, Jennifer finished, still staring at the results. He didn't need to say much. Just confirmed what I already suspected, my missing embryos somehow ended up in my sister. Jennifer set the paper down. I don't even have words. Both medical malpractice and personal betrayal. I need to know how deep this goes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Before I confront either of them. You need specialized legal help, Jennifer said, already scrolling through her contacts. Elizabeth Chen. She specializes in reproductive law. I'm calling her now. While Jennifer arranged an emergency meeting, I turned back to the storm. Lightning illuminated my reflection in the glass. I barely recognized the woman staring back at me. 3 days later. David's home office was meticulously organized, just like him. His medical diplomas hung proudly on the wall: Harvard Medical School, Johns Hopkins residency, board certified in reproductive endocrinology. I'd once found his precision comforting. Now it felt like a facade. I waited until he left for his emergency consultation before slipping inside. His computer was password protected, but after 10 years of marriage, I knew his patterns. His mother's maiden name plus his birth year. Predictable. What wasn't predictable was the folder labeled Singapore Conference. David hadn't mentioned any Singapore trip. Inside were hotel reservations, a suite with a king bed, and 2 round-trip tickets. One for David Morrison. One for Sophia Brown. Dated from January. 8 months ago. My hands trembled slightly as I took photos with my phone. Evidence. The architect in me was methodical, even as my world collapsed. Then I found it. In his desk drawer, beneath medical journals, a second phone. Unlocked. Unlike his regular iPhone, this one contained only text messages with one contact, S. I scrolled to January. Embryo transfer successful. Higher chance with twins. She suspects nothing. Thinks they failed again. You will finally have what Catherine could not give you. The messages continued, detailing their affair, their plan. How they'd stolen my embryos during one of my procedures. How they'd arranged for Sophia's experimental fertility treatment, had a clinic in Singapore to avoid detection. I sat in David's leather chair, the evidence spread before me. My training as an architect had taught me to find structural weaknesses, to identify points where things might collapse under pressure. I knew exactly where to apply pressure now. 1 week later. Sophia's apartment was filled with shopping bags from expensive baby boutiques. 2 identical white cribs stood against the wall, still partly in their packaging. Everything was in pairs. 2 of everything. She looked surprised when she opened the door. Catherine. I wasn't expecting you. Clearly, I said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. My sister wore a designer maternity dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her stomach was prominently displayed, housing the children that should have been growing in mine. Would you like some tea? She asked nervously. I've switched to herbal for the babies. How thoughtful, I replied, my voice ice. When were you going to tell me about Singapore? Her smile faltered. What? The fertility clinic in Singapore. January. The embryo transfer. My embryos. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach. A protective gesture that made my chest tighten. Catherine, I don't know what you're talking about. I had an experimental treatment. Stop lying, Sophia. I placed David's second phone on her marble coffee table. I have the messages. I have the DNA results. I know everything. Her face was drained of all colors as she slowly lowered herself onto the couch. How could you? My voice finally cracked. Your own sister? You don't understand, she whispered, tears forming. You have everything. The perfect career, the perfect husband, the perfect life. You've always had everything. Except children, I said quietly. The one thing I wanted most. That was my one chance. Sophia cried. After my diagnosis, what was I supposed to do? Just accept that I'd never be a mother while you had viable embryos just sitting there? Embryos you couldn't even use properly. The casual cruelty of her words struck me like physical blows. So you and David decided to take them. Without my knowledge. Without my consent. She looked away, guilt finally showing through her defiance. He loves me, Catherine. He always has. Another blow. I remained standing, refusing to show weakness. Those babies are mine, Sophia. Biologically, legally, morally, they are mine. I'm carrying them, she shot back, anger replacing guilt. I'm their mother. We'll let the courts decide that. I said, gathering my purse. You and David have committed multiple crimes. Theft of genetic material. Medical fraud. My lawyer will be in touch. As I turned to leave, Sophia called after me, panic in her voice. Catherine, please. What are you going to do? I paused at the door, not turning back. What I've always done, Sophia. Build something stronger from the ruins. I set the stage carefully for my confrontation with David. Evidence arranged on the coffee table. Security system recording. When he came home at 11:30, surprise quickly morphed to concern. Catherine? Everything okay? Where were you tonight? My voice was calm. Too calm. Emergency surgery? At Chicago Memorial? He nodded. Yes. Interesting, I said, since I called there. No emergency surgeries for Dr. Morrison today. A flicker crossed his face. Calculation. I know about Singapore, David. I know about the embryo theft. I know about you and Sophia. Silence fell between us. Then a transformation, the mask of the caring husband vanished. How did you find out? His voice was different. Colder. Does it matter? I showed him the second phone. 3 years of fertility treatments. 3 years of failures. And all along. It wasn't working, he said flatly. The embryos were viable. You weren't. The clinical assessment of my failure hit like a slap. So you stole them. You gave them to my sister. Sophia can carry them. She deserves to be a mother. And I don't. He looked pained. You have your buildings, Catherine. Your career. Sophia has nothing. Except you. How long? 2 years. 2 years. While I endured hormones, procedures, disappointments, he was with my sister. You were diagnosed as the perfect candidate for IVF, he continued clinically. But after 3 failed implantations, it was clear your body was rejecting them. So you played God? Decided who deserved to be a mother. I made a medical decision. You made a personal one, I corrected. Based on who you were sleeping with. His jaw tightened. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. I gestured to the evidence. Hotel receipts. Text messages. DNA results. The Medical Ethics Board will find it very simple. Fear flickered across his face. What do you want? I want you to say it. Tell me the truth. He sank into the chair. For a moment, he looked like the man I'd married. I love her, Catherine. I've loved Sophia for years. Even though I'd suspected, hearing him say it punctured something deep. And the embryos? It was my idea, he admitted. After your 3rd failed implantation, Sophia was diagnosed with premature ovarian failure. She couldn't produce viable eggs. You had 7 healthy embryos in storage. Our embryos, I corrected. Yes. The plan was for one attempt with Sophia. If it worked, we'd say they were from an anonymous donor. But that's not what happened. When I saw how happy she was with the positive pregnancy test, I couldn't take that away from her. So instead, you took it away from me. My voice finally cracked. You were never going to carry them to term. The medical evidence was clear. That wasn't your decision to make. They were my embryos. They're my children too, he said quietly. I laughed bitterly. Now they're your children? When you've been helping Sophia prepare to raise them without me knowing they exist. He had no answer. Get out of my house, I said. This is my house too. Not anymore. I handed him an envelope. My lawyer's contact information. Any communication goes through her. He scanned the document inside. His face paled. You can't be serious. I have evidence for everything. You're making a mistake, he said, anger showing. I have connections. I have influence. I smiled coldly. You have no idea who you're up against. I've documented everything. Your medical license, practice, reputation, I can destroy it all. And what about the babies? I'm going to make sure they have at least one parent who puts their needs first. I love those children, he insisted. You love yourself more, I replied. A father who truly loved his children wouldn't have stolen them from their mother. Technically, Sophia is. Don't. My voice was sharp enough to make him flinch. He gathered his coat, defeated for now. This isn't over. You're right about that. Now get out before I call the police and report the theft of my genetic material. After he left, I changed the locks myself. As I tightened the last screw, I felt something I hadn't in months. Power. Purpose. And the fierce love of a mother who would stop at nothing to protect her children. Next day. He admitted everything? Elizabeth looked impressed as she reviewed my notes. Yes. I recorded the conversation. I handed her a flash drive. This is excellent, she said. Now things get complicated. We file for emergency injunctive relief to establish your parental rights. We file ethics complaints against your husband. And we prepare for a custody battle. Will we win? There's no precedent quite like this case, she admitted. You're the genetic mother, Sophia is the gestational carrier, and there was no surrogacy agreement. But the fact that your embryos were used without consent gives us solid ground. What outcome are you seeking? She asked carefully. I want my children, I said without hesitation. Full custody. I paused. I haven't thought that far ahead. I just know they're mine. The court will consider many factors, Elizabeth explained. Including the fact that Sophia has been carrying them for 8 months. Judges are reluctant to separate newborns from birth mothers. Even when those babies were stolen? Even then. The system prioritizes the best interests of the children above all else. I looked out the window, watching normal lives continue below. What would you do? I asked. If they were your embryos, your husband, your sister? Elizabeth considered this. I'd prepare for every outcome. Hope for justice, but be ready to compromise for the sake of the children. Compromise with thieves? If necessary, she said gently. Because ultimately, this isn't about punishment. It's about those twins. I nodded slowly. I understand. But first, we fight. First, we fight, she agreed. Hospital, 2 months later. The call came at 3 a.m. Sophia was in labor. 2 months early. I rushed to the hospital, heart pounding. Elizabeth met me in the lobby. Stay calm, she advised. The court granted you equal medical decision rights, but this is still volatile. The maternity floor was chaos. David stood outside a delivery room in scrubs from another hospital. Complications, he said. Preeclampsia. Emergency C-section. My heart raced. My babies. In danger. Hours passed in tense silence. Finally, a nurse approached. Ms. Morrison? The twins are stable but need NICU care. Would you like to see them? David stepped forward, but the nurse looked at me. I followed her to a room filled with incubators. In the corner, 2 tiny beings connected to tubes and wires. A boy and a girl, the nurse said softly. 3 pounds each. They're fighters. I approached cautiously. The girl had my eyes. The boy had David's chin. Can I? I gestured. You can touch them through here, she demonstrated the incubator ports. I placed my hand inside, my finger against my daughter's tiny palm. Her fingers reflexively curled around mine. Everything crystallized. The lawsuits, betrayal, pain, it all fell away. There was only this. Two tiny humans who needed me. I'm here, I whispered. I'm your mother. And I will always protect you. Through the glass, I saw Sophia being wheeled past, pale and sedated. Our eyes met briefly. In that moment, I realized this wasn't just about justice anymore. It was about healing. About creating something new from broken pieces. These children deserved better than a war zone. Somehow, we would find a way forward. But first, I would hold my babies. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The twins had been in the NICU for 3 weeks. Emma and Oliver, I named them despite David and Sophia's protests. Every day I sat beside their incubators, reading architecture books aloud, explaining how buildings stood strong against impossible forces. Their lungs are getting stronger, the nurse told me. The girl especially, she's quite the fighter. Like her mother, I said softly. I just settled in when David and Sophia arrived. They weren't supposed to be here during my visiting hours. Catherine, David nodded. We need to talk. My lawyer advised against direct communication, I said, not looking up from Emma, whose tiny fingers were wrapped around my pinky. This can't go on, Sophia said. She looked different, thinner, paler. The hearing is tomorrow. We need to find a solution that doesn't tear these babies apart. You should have thought about that before stealing my embryos. There are babies too, David insisted. Biologically, yes, I acknowledged. Ethically? No. Please, Catherine, Sophia stepped closer. I carried them. I felt them grow inside me. For 8 months, they were part of me. You can't just take them away. For a moment, I saw genuine pain in her eyes. Not manipulative tears, but real maternal anguish. You should have considered that before implanting someone else's embryos, I said, but with less edge. A nurse approached. Everything okay? The babies can sense stress. We're just leaving, I said, gently disentangling Emma's fingers from mine. To my surprise, David's eyes were fixed on Oliver. His oxygen levels are better today, he noted, the doctor momentarily displacing the adversary. Yes, I agreed reluctantly. They reduced his supplemental oxygen this morning. For a brief instant, we were just 3 people worried about 2 tiny babies. We'll see you in court tomorrow, I said, gathering my things. As I walked away, Sophia called after me. Catherine, please. Think about what's best for Emma and Oliver. I paused. I've thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. Next day. Judge Harriet Wilson wasted no time on preliminaries. This is an unusual case, she began. Today I want to hear directly from all parties before making my ruling on temporary custody. Elizabeth Chen leaned over, whispering, she's known for children-first rulings. Stay focused on the twins' well-being. David's attorney argued that Sophia, as the birth mother, had formed critical biological and emotional bonds with the twins. Medical science recognizes the unique bond between birth mother and child. And Dr. Morrison's position? As the biological father and a medical professional, Dr. Morrison is uniquely positioned to care for these premature infants. I gripped the edge of the table as he emphasized their preparation, their togetherness. Elizabeth presented our case methodically, the stolen embryos, the years of fertility treatments, the deception. Ms. Morrison is not only the genetic mother, she is the victim of a profound violation. The judge turned to me. Ms. Morrison, why should I grant you custody of these children? I stood, speaking from my heart. Your Honor, for 3 years, I underwent fertility treatments. Painful injections, hormones that made me sick, the emotional roller coaster with each failed implantation. Those embryos were created from my eggs. They were my future. I steadied my voice. I didn't abandon them. They were stolen from me by the 2 people I trusted most. And despite that betrayal, I love Emma and Oliver more than I thought possible. I loved them before I knew they existed. I loved them when they were just hopes in test tubes. I'm not asking to exclude Sophia and David from their lives. But these children are mine, biologically, legally, and morally. All I want is the chance to be their mother. Judge Wilson turned to Sophia, who rose trembling. I know what I did was wrong, she began, her voice breaking. After my diagnosis, being told I could never have children. I've made terrible mistakes. But I love those babies. For 8 months, they grew inside me. I felt every kick, every hiccup. Her emotion was palpable. Please don't punish them for my mistakes. They know my voice, my heartbeat. I'm the only mother they've known so far. David stood next. Your Honor, I'm a reproductive endocrinologist. I understand the desperation infertility creates. He glanced at me. What I did was wrong. I betrayed my wife's trust. I violated my medical oath. But those twins are my children too. And I want to be their father. Judge Wilson considered us all. This is among the most complex custody cases I've encountered. We have 2 biological parents, one of whom is also the birth mother. We have serious ethical issues to consider. But my primary concern is what serves the best interests of Emma and Oliver. She continued. DNA tests confirm that Catherine Morrison is the genetic mother. Hospital records confirm that Sophia Brown is the birth mother. Both women have legitimate maternal claims. Therefore, my temporary ruling is joint legal custody to all 3 parties. Primary physical custody to Catherine Morrison, with substantial visitation rights for Sophia Brown and David Morrison. A gasp from Sophia or me, I wasn't sure. These arrangements will be re-evaluated in 6 months, Judge Wilson added. I expect all parties to behave as adults, putting these children's needs above your conflicts. Elizabeth squeezed my arm. This is a win, Catherine. But watching Sophia collapse into tears, I felt no triumph. The twins were coming home tomorrow. Home to my hastily prepared apartment, with 2 cribs assembled by Jennifer. I stood in the nursery, formerly my home office, touching soft blankets, arranging stuffed animals, trying to imagine my life now. Mother to 2 infants. Single parent. Forever connected to my husband and sister through shared DNA. The doorbell rang. Sophia stood in the hallway, looking smaller somehow. May I come in? She asked. Every instinct told me to slam the door. But something in her expression stopped me. 5 minutes, I said. She entered hesitantly and handed me a notebook. Inside were handwritten pages, dated entries. It's everything I experienced during the pregnancy, she explained. When they started kicking. What foods made them active. The songs they responded to. I stared at her, confused. They're your babies, Catherine, she said, her voice breaking. I was just borrowing them. I know that now. But I thought you should have this. So you don't miss everything that happened before. The gesture was so unexpected, so genuine, that I didn't know how to respond. She continued, the kids like to hum in low tones. She wiped away tears. I'm not asking forgiveness. I just want what's best for them. Sophia. I know they're yours, she interrupted. But please don't shut me out of their lives. I'll be whatever you want, aunt, godmother, friend. Just please, don't take them away completely. Looking at my sister, the person who'd betrayed me most deeply yet was giving me the most precious gift imaginable, I felt the first crack in my anger. We'll figure something out, I said finally. For the twins' sake. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it felt like the first fragile bridge across an impossible chasm. The next day, Emma and Oliver would come home. And somehow, we would all learn to build something new from the ruins. 3 months later. Emma likes the red blocks best, Sophia said, sitting cross-legged on my floor. And Oliver puts everything in his mouth. I nodded, preparing their bottles. 3 months into our arrangement, we were still learning to co-parent. The twins were thriving, developing distinct personalities. Emma had my intensity. Oliver smiled at everyone. Their pediatrician says they're catching up, I said. No lasting effects from prematurity. We existed in limbo, not enemies, not friends. Each handoff was a dance of politeness covering wounds. Catherine, Sophia began, I've started therapy. Real therapy. I've been trying to understand why I did what I did. The therapist thinks I've spent my life comparing myself to you. You were always the smart one, the successful one. Even your failures were impressive. That's not true, I said. It is. When you had trouble conceiving, you approached it methodically. Even your infertility was organized. I almost laughed. There was nothing organized about crying myself to sleep after failed implantations. Her eyes widened. You never showed that part. I don't broadcast my breakdowns. When I got my diagnosis, I fell apart completely, Sophia said. When David suggested using your embryos, it felt like taking something you couldn't have. It was the worst thing I've ever done. Tears filled her eyes. I'm sorry, Catherine. Not just for taking your embryos, but for all the jealousy I've carried. I returned with a photo album of our childhood. Look at my face, I said. I was terrified all the time. You were the brave one. You took risks, lived fully. I just planned and controlled. I pointed to a teenage photo, Sophia expressive, me practical. I envied your freedom, I admitted. Your ability to experience life instead of managing it. She looked shocked. You envied me? We've been comparing ourselves in opposite ways. You thought I had everything together. I thought you had all the passion. That's actually funny, Sophia said, almost smiling. In a tragic way, I agreed. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I said honestly. But I understand better now. For the twins, I'd like to build something new. I'd like that too, she whispered. 6 months later. Higher, Aunt Sophia. Emma commanded from the swing. At 9 months, the twins were growing rapidly, premature status just a memory. I sat with Oliver, who watched a butterfly. They're thriving, David said, joining me. His visitations had evolved into family outings, all 5 of us together in an arrangement that worked despite appearances. The ethics committee gave me a 3-year suspension, David said. And the criminal case ended with probation. This détente wasn't friendship, wasn't peace, but it worked. For the twins, we compromised. I've never properly apologized, David said. I was selfish and arrogant. I watched Sophia with Emma, loving a child she'd accepted wasn't solely hers. We all contributed, I said finally. Not equally, what you did was worse. But my need for control played a part too. David looked surprised. That's generous. Realistic, I corrected, handing him Oliver. We're connected for life now. 1 year later, first birthday party. Balloons, presents, cake-smeared faces, and twins giggling over wrapping paper filled my apartment. I watched Sophia help Emma unwrap gifts while David steadied Oliver on new legs. Our strange family had found rhythm. The custody arrangement was formalized. I had primary custody, with Sophia and David having 3 days weekly. We put the twins first. Mama. Emma called, holding up a giraffe. My heart swelled. She called both Sophia and me versions of mother. I was Mama, Sophia a Mimi, and David Dada. It's beautiful, sweetheart, I said. Sophia caught my eye. She has your focus. And Oliver has your expressiveness, I replied. We shared a genuine smile, our first since this began. Later, with the twins napping, the adults gathered in the kitchen. A year ago, I wanted to destroy you both, I admitted. We deserved it, David said. But Emma and Oliver deserved better than warring parents. To Emma and Oliver, Sophia raised her cup. Who taught us to be family again? We clinked cups, this imperfect family that somehow worked. 3 years later. And the princess decided she didn't need a prince, I read to the twins. She could build her own castle. With a swimming pool? Oliver asked. If she wanted. And dragons. Emma added. Friendly ones, I said, closing the book. Later, with both children asleep, I sat on my balcony overlooking Chicago. 3 years had transformed us all. The twins were thriving, bright, secure, resilient. They moved between homes with ease, loved by 3 parents who had found cooperation after betrayal. Sophia had started a support group for women with infertility. She and David got married. And I had changed most of all. The controlling architect had become someone more flexible, more forgiving, more capable of joy and imperfection. My phone showed Sophia's text, kids excited for zoo tomorrow? Packed sunscreen but forgot hats. I smiled, replying, very excited. We'll bring hats. Emma insists on giraffes first. 3 years ago, facing the deepest betrayal imaginable, I'd promised to build something stronger from ruins. Looking at my sleeping children, twins born of deception but raised in hard-won harmony, I realized I had. Not the family I'd planned. Not the life I'd designed. Something messier, more complicated, but ultimately stronger. Sometimes the most beautiful structures rise from the most catastrophic collapses. And sometimes forgiveness is a foundation rebuilt brick by brick, day by day, for those you love.